inspires me knowing that so many in our community are interested in following events playing out thousands of miles away in Ukraine. For me, those events are both relevant and consequential, affecting world peace, our security, our democracy, and our respect for human life. The war that Putin has brought to this struggling country and its people is an abomination. It requires our continued engagement. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being interested in what we might say tonight. I first learned about Ukraine 6 years ago when I taught a course on American constitutional law to law students in Berdansk, a lovely city on the Azov Sea on the eastern border with Russia. Since then, I stayed in touch with friends that I had made there. When Russian troops marched into the city, destroying their lives, it became personal to me. So when my friends Jeff Mayer and Nancy Diamond told me that their son Brian was in country helping, I asked if I could join the family in its efforts to do something tangible to help. Brian needed more tourniquets, IV catheters, burn kits, water purification tablets, and the like. Collectively, the three of us filled duffel bags and brought them over to the Polish-Ukraine border. There was a long line behind us in the check-in gate, a lot of angry people wondering who's bringing all those supplies. We had at least 8 or 9 large duffel bags full of supplies. From there, collectively, we filled the duffel bags and brought them to Poland and Ukraine border. From there, we loaded, reloaded, and transported pallets of humanitarian supplies to Lviv. I want to personally thank Westport EMS, Norwalk Hospital, and our four local pharmacies, Colonial Druggist, Acorns, Walgreens, and CVS, for their contributions of medical supplies. And I'd also like to thank you and all of the many Westport donors who contributed to UAI to help support the financial needs in buying equipment to bring with us and on. It was a, yes, thank you. For me, it's another example of our community joining the mission to help the Ukrainian struggle against tyranny. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Brian Mayer to you. He grew up in Westport, attended Westport schools through middle school before graduating Hobson School in New Haven. Since graduating the University of Chicago, where he was an honors history major, he's been a serial entrepreneur, starting businesses in Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Brian is currently VP of Global Data and Analytics at Daily Pay, a leading fintech company in New York. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, Brian felt the need to step up and be counted. He thought his executive skills could be put to good use. He started, with the help of his brother Marshall, a not-for-profit organization, Ukraine Aid International, whose stated mission is to support direct humanitarian and medical aid to the Ukrainian people with accountability, compassion, and dedication through volunteer networks and by supporting partner organizations with aligned missions. Since then, Brian has facilitated the shipments of hundreds of thousands of kilos of food, medicine, medical supplies, and humanitarian aid into Ukraine, mostly to the war-torn regions of Kharkiv and the Donbass region. He's also helped to transport and resettle countless refugees in Europe and beyond. So please welcome my new friend, a real hero, Brian Mayer.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you. Oh, these are your microphone's off, I think. Let's make sure that. Thank you, Ken, and thank you so much for your support, and thank you for coming to visit me in Ukraine. Ken spent some time there, and we did some work together. And thanks to all of you, for those of you who have sent in donations, we really appreciate it, and they've been put to good use, and hopefully we're going to go through and show you some of that right now. So Before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone a location primer, because I know you hear a lot of these city names but don't always know where they are. And I couldn't tell you either if I didn't have a map in front of me, to be honest. But as you can see, the major occupied regions right now in red, this map is up to date as of a week ago. There hasn't been much change on the military front. Now, the Russians, when they first invaded, came and made it all the way to Kyiv, but got pushed back, and now Ukraine has regained control of all those regions. They also made it all the way to Kharkiv. They also got pushed back from there. And the rest of the front has been a constant struggle back and forth, where Putin is pretty clearly trying to cut off the rest of the Black Sea. And so most of the assault right now is happening in Mykolaiv and Kherson and Odessa, all get hit frequently. And if you see, that town that I had to put onto the BBC map is called Przemysl. I think I got that right. If there's any Polish speakers here, I apologize. And that is the town in Poland that is the biggest city close to Lviv, which is the biggest city in Western Ukraine. So it's a great base of operations on the EU side. And Lviv is, of course, is where we spend most of our time when we're coordinating aid efforts. It's a relatively safe city in Western Ukraine, although there have been some limited attacks. So that's the map. And as you can see, that box over there is where one of our ground teams, Alex 21, they're a self-organized nonprofit, and you'll see some videos from them because they're great at taking videos. They're right there. We're all the way close to, in the Donbas region, right near Donetsk, and very, very dangerous area where they're wearing protective gear all the time. Actually, last week, they were in Dnipro, and they went on a little shopping trip with your money. Let's see if this works.
Thanks to Brian Mayer.
And our friends from Connecticut.
That's lots of stuff.
These are the last carts out of 8, I believe. 10? Was it 10 carts? And we're just left here with hygiene products, and the rest is ours.
So they're on the right there, they got all the stuff from Metro, which is kind of like a Costco-like wholesaler in Dnipro, and there they are, laying it all out, loading it out. Now, the reason they're shopping, and the first obvious question I'm sure most of you are asking is, why are they, if they can go shopping, why can't people just go shopping for stuff they need? They're about 200 kilometers away from the front lines, and the people they're bringing this to are not able, in most cases, to actually get anywhere, and they don't have access to these goods. So it's a very last-mile effort.
Thanks to Brian.
Could I add something to that?
Yes.
That young lady that you saw in the camouflage gear, she's 25 years old. She speaks 5 languages. Her father was Russian, so she speaks Russian. She could be a major player in any corporation in this country. And yet she's chosen to make it her career at the moment to drive, buy supplies, and bring supplies, kits, all the way to the front lines. And her stories, which I'll share a little bit later when we get into the volunteers. But I didn't want to pass up that picture without sharing you the extraordinary young people who've come from all over the world to aid the Ukrainian people. Their passion, their commitment is just incredible. So we'll learn more about them as we go on. But I didn't want that picture to pass without you recognizing how terrific a person she was.
Yeah, Liz is fantastic, and her team is great, and you'll see a lot more videos from them because they've been there from the beginning, and she's also a former Instagram influencer, so she's good at taking videos and has lots of great content. So let's talk about the crisis in Ukraine really quick, just so you all have some good context. There's obviously a refugee crisis. That's the thing most of us heard about when the war first broke out. The refugee crisis outside of Ukraine is largely subsided. Most people who left, about 5 million Ukrainians left the country, and most of them have resettled in Europe with friends and family. There's still quite a few refugees who are at the border, still in refugee camps, but at least those camps exist. And so when the crisis first broke out, there was hundreds of thousands of people flooding through the borders, and they had to all disperse somewhere. There's a huge internal displacement crisis. And this is where most international attention is not focused because, for a couple of reasons, NGOs have a hard time getting into Ukraine is the main reason. But there's estimated 12 million internally displaced people in Ukraine. These are people who've lost their homes, or the Russians have occupied their territory, they've escaped, and they don't have anywhere to live, so they're finding places to live in Ukraine. Lviv, the city in the west there, normally has a population of 700,000. Now it has a population of 1.4 million. So cities are absorbing, inside of Ukraine, are absorbing populations from the east, which is causing its own, shortages and problems. Huge humanitarian crisis, obviously, lots of people left without food, without clean water. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And especially the closer you get to the Russians, the harder it is to get anything. And these people, in many cases, the ones that are left, a lot of people escaped if they could. They don't have vehicles, they have elderly, relatives, or they have to take care of. They are elderly, they have mobility problems, they're disabled. There's a lot of reasons why you can't leave. Or your entire life is there, you have nowhere to go, you have no friends, you have no family anywhere else, you don't speak any other languages. The military crisis is obvious, we can skip over that one. And of course, there's economic crisis. So this is a picture that I snapped on my third or fourth trip into the country. We think gas prices being too high is a big problem here, but it's a better problem than no gas, which is what Ukrainians have to deal with. And of course, no gas means the cost of getting anything anywhere, any food, any medicine, running ambulances, running police, basic services, not to mention the military needs diesel as well. It causes problems. So that particular problem has been solved. They opened up new shipping routes for gas, and it's incredibly expensive, but Ukrainians can get gas now. But for a month or so in that time, it was really difficult. And of course, these crises have been completely compounded. Most large NGOs are not operating inside Ukraine. The Catholic Church is the only one that I'm aware of that does massive aid operations inside Ukraine. They've managed to get lots and lots of trucks in there. The UN has facilitated some, but none of the major NGOs that you've heard of I've seen on the ground in Ukraine, so that's notable. The EU, and especially in Poland, the bureaucracy, I apologize to any Poles here again, I'm sorry, but the bureaucracy has been hampering relief efforts in quite a few ways, especially at the border. So getting things across the border is quite difficult from the Polish side, not from the Ukraine side, but from the Polish side, leaving Poland. But there's also a lot of things like, for example, shipping medicine. If you want to ship medicine into Warsaw, it'll get held at customs for a month, 2 months, if you don't have the proper documentation. So people are trying to help getting their medical aid getting held up, and the documentation takes a long time, and you need a lot of, hoops to go through there. Corruption in Ukraine is still an ongoing problem. It was a very corrupt country before the war. It's still very corrupt country now. We have learned to use this to our advantage when we get stuck in some situations. But for the most part, it is hampering official relief efforts. You have generals stealing equipment from their soldiers. That's a very common one. Families will send, food or care packages to their soldiers on the front, and it'll get intercepted by the commanders, and that's an actual thing that happens. And so a lot of the aid work that's being done, especially for those who are helping soldiers, is to take it to the soldiers directly. But it's not just with the military; it's across the entire government infrastructure. So a lot of unnecessary traffic stops and speeding tickets and things like that make it very difficult to get aid from one end of the country to the other. Ongoing assault from Russia on civilian populations. Russia is definitely targeting civilians. There's no question about that. I've seen it. I've seen civilian neighborhoods completely destroyed. I'll show you some pictures, and I'll show you another a video next to highlight this. And of course, the Russian blockade of shipping routes. So you saw that map. The Black Sea is almost completely blocked off. And this means that all aid has to flow through the land borders. So this is just one border picture that we snapped. But this line of trucks on the right there runs back about 7 kilometers and takes 1 or 2 weeks to get through. So if you're trying to get stuff from Poland or the EU, anywhere in the world really, into Ukraine, can't do it by air, can't do it by sea. It has to go through the land routes. And so that's just clogging things up. Sometimes wait times got as long as 3 weeks. Now it's from what I understand, it's down to a week or 2. So this is a video from Venetia. So the background behind this video, actually, I was in Lviv at the time, so I was about 200 kilometers away. I was safe. But the air raid alarm went off when I was at a warehouse about to pick up a couple tons of aid. And the warehouse staff has to leave the warehouse when that happens, because these warehouses are a target, these giant supply warehouses. So the staff is gone, we're waiting. Suddenly we start getting tweets coming through the feed, that a rocket had hit Venezia, which is the city about 400,000 people. And Liz, who you saw, and her partner happened to be, just by coincidence, parked 100 meters from the blast. And they had just parked their car. They had decided, instead of to park in the shade, in the sun, they decided to park in the shade. And then the blast happened, and she started filming almost immediately. And I'm going to stop and apologize for the language before it starts, but there is some strong language here, and there's some strong visuals as well.
Holy fuck, where? The shopping center, oh shit! Oh my god, holy shit! Something behind. Drone, yeah, I saw it. You okay? Go get the IFAC, get the IFAC.
IFAC is an individual first aid kit.
Oh my god, the entire bus is missing windows.
So the thing about these rocket blasts,
I'm not a medic. There's burn dressing.
now they're trying to help out. They have their first aid kits on the scene, so they're able to help.
Shit! Would have never thought in Venezia the car still has windows.
So the incredible thing here is that they were on scene, first of all. This is right after the blast. Now, a couple things people don't realize. One, this was a commercial shopping center, so it's like the mall. It's a civilian area, right in the middle of town, in the middle of Saturday afternoon. And the Russians sent another rocket 30 minutes later to hit, to help Liz, her crew, but all the first responders who showed up, the police, the firemen. That second rocket was intercepted. This first rocket killed 20 or 30 people. The toll keeps climbing. And as you can see, the injuries are substantial. And the other thing about these rockets when they hit is it's not just the area it hits, it's hundreds of meters in all directions. The shockwave destroys shop windows and buildings and cars, and people can get injured and even killed from hundreds of meters away. So even if they're targeting a military or they can claim it's a military target, they're still causing a lot of civilian. So I'll stop there. And that was in Venezia right there. The other shocking thing about this attack is that Venezia is so far from the front lines, it couldn't possibly have been an accident. It wasn't a stray rocket. It was a deliberate random rocket. It was a long-range rocket.
Holy fuck.
Oops, sorry. Okay. So, very important point to make that Ken alluded to, but the humanitarian efforts are almost entirely run by self-directed volunteers. So, I've met hundreds of people like me who just showed up. And I guess at least 10,000 expats are volunteering at the border. That's my guess, because I know of thousands personally, either by reputation, by name, or what orgs they're with. And the official government capabilities are very limited. You had some great experiences meeting some of these people. This is John, who you met, yeah. And that's Brogan with some dogs.
Again, it's the volunteers that so impress me. We went out for a beer on the first night that we arrived, and it was about 9 o'clock or so. And it's like a band of brothers. These fellows and ladies were having a beer and sharing stories. And I went up to one fellow, and he was talking to him. He had driven 18,000 miles last month. I said, where do you go for 18,000 miles? He said, well, I signed up as a driver to take wounded soldiers to Germany for medical care. Tomorrow I'm picking up a double amputee, and I'm driving him to a facility in Germany. I'll come back and I'll keep doing it. And that's what he volunteered to do, is to become a driver helping wounded soldiers. Another fellow.
That was John, by the way, right there.
John. I mean, a terrific fellow, and you sit there aghast at what the stories they're telling, and so impressed, again, with these people who have uprooted their lives to participate in a campaign to help the Ukrainian people who are desperately in need of it. And I have more war stories to tell you about other volunteers that we'll see, but I'll let you go back to your story, Brian.
No, it's true. And John is, he owns a brewery in Canada, and he has a life that he put on hold for this. Brogan also put her life on hold, and she's there playing with some dogs. The animal crisis is really bad as well, and there's tons of abandoned animals now that need a home, and that there are a lot of groups doing that. On the left is my first aid drop. Very, very proud of my tiny 2-pallet delivery. On the right is one of the later ones where we had a full 10 tons that we sent, and that truck went to Kharkiv. So, getting a lot of volunteers together and organizing is a very big part of what's going on there. And I wonder, somehow this ended up not full screen anymore.
Well, let me jump in again.
I'm gonna fix that.
The volunteers, they somehow communicate in a world that I know nothing about, Reddit and other means of communication, but these strangers coalesce, organize on the internet. Someone will say, I need a driver, or I have a warehouse, or I need some supplies, and they organize with one another, and somehow it all happens. There was a young man, he was a geology student in Seattle. He was going to go out travel with his uncle, and his uncle had to cancel for some reason. So he said, well, I've got a free month that I had nothing to do. He goes on Reddit, he finds out that they need some help in a warehouse somewhere near the border. He packs his backpack and his tent, and off he goes. Doesn't know anyone, finds somebody, gets organized, and I think we have a photograph here somewhere. He camped out on the floor of the warehouse with his tent. He had a bathroom and a kitchen, and what he did for 30 days is he loaded, unloaded, repackaged supplies in this warehouse. And as we were talking, he was saying, I've got to go back to school next week. But that's how he chose to spend a good part of his summer. Just a young man from Seattle, a geology student. And there were lots of them like that. It just amazed me. Very impressive. I don't want to keep coming back to that theme because their stories just were so impressive on that.
I'm just playing this video in the background. Every single one of these volunteers has a similar story, well, not the same story, but similar stories, right? Dropped everything, came to Ukraine. They're from the UK, they're from Ireland, they're from France, Canada, North America. So lots of needs still. Medical is probably the most persistent right now. These IFACs are lifesavers, as you could see, individual first aid kits. The problem is these rockets, you never know when they're going to hit, and when they do, you don't have time to run to the store to get first aid. So these individual first aid kits, especially on the front, they fold up. You can carry them with you, like in a backpack or on the front, and they have scissors for cutting off clothes from burn victims. They have burn ointment, cream, and hemostatic bandages. So combat tourniquets, all very important. There's also shortages of basic medication that most people easily have access to during peacetime. Insulin is a big one, cancer treatments. The problem with insulin and a lot of these medicines actually is they have to be transported refrigerated. And getting things across the country right now is expensive, and trucks keep breaking down, and these things it's becoming more and more problem. Food, like we talked about, and in areas like Kharkiv, we'll see some pictures, completely destroyed apartment buildings, hundreds of thousands of people displaced. They need to get food somewhere, and so what we do is we drop large caches of food at churches, community centers, city halls, and then the community will come in and pick up food when they need. These are some of our friends doing exactly that at Stellar Ukraine, which is a UAI nonprofit that I connected with when I first went out there. On the right is there's some of their food deliveries in Kharkiv. So these are people who are displaced by the war. They come in or they get delivered, and they have people on the ground that literally get on their bike, like Grubhub, and they just take these 1 week food bags with provisions for a week for each of these people. Hey everyone, I'm here with Vitaly and Nick and Dodge is down there. Wait, where is he? So we just wanted to say thank you for all your support.
Yeah, thanks guys for supporting us and the organization, because with your donations we receive, we can buy foods and send it to Kharkiv, which is struggling now really much with different humanitarian issues. And with that donations, around 40 people daily receive their food.
40,000.
40,000 people daily, right.
Every single day, yeah.
Yeah, every single day. So thank you for your support, for your position, and for donations you are making.
So 40,000 people a day. that are coming into this warehouse in Kharkiv to pick up food. And for a while, our organization was the only one providing funding and support and transport for this food. The other major issue is water. So hundreds of thousands, no one really knows how many, entire cities for sure. Mykolaiv is a city of 300,000 before the war, probably 800,000 or 900,000 now, about 300,000. Doesn't have any clean water, the entire city. They are currently adapting. We just actually sent out 100,000 water purification tabs. Not a lot, but some to help. They're adapting in many ways, boiling water and all that. But we've also been helping with these filtration systems. So a lot of you have actually helped fund these filtration systems, and so thank you again. Each one, yes, round of applause. Each one of these filtration systems costs $6,200 and can provide clean drinking water for 30,000 people. So you need quite a few of them. We've got 3 or 4 more that are in the works right now to purchase. One more is going to Mykolaiv, and 2 more are being installed in water trucks. One of the biggest concerns you have with these water filtration systems is that they need to be installed in a public place. A fire station is where this last one was installed. The problem with that is that these are targets. And so if you spend all this time and money installing a water filtration system only to have the Russians blow it up, which they will when they find out about it, it's obviously a tragedy. So the solution is to install it on mobile water trucks. And so you get you set up these mobile water delivery systems where you have a well, you filter the water at the well, you put it on the truck, and then you send it to the villages that need it. So this was
in Mykolaiv, they have a very big problem with clean water. The water is what they refer to as being technical, meaning that you can't drink it, you can't shower with it, you can't really do anything with it. And the government has been a little bit slow and having a lot of bureaucracy complication issues with managing this problem quickly. So with the thanks of our donors and our supporters, we were able to deliver these systems that are hopefully going to make a pretty big difference in the clean water supply for the citizens of Mykolaiv. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
In Mykolaiv, they have a
very exciting. So we're also working with some great partners on the ground. So Alex 21 I mentioned, and these are all similar NGOs to ours who just appeared for this, and we all work together and cooperate very closely. Sometimes they have supplies, we have the trucks. Sometimes we have supplies and they have the trucks. Sometimes they have the volunteers and we don't have anyone on the ground, right? So there's a constant cooperation happening with all these different groups. And so these are just some of the groups that we work with that we just want to call out. And they're not paid, and they're risking their lives every day. So this is the last video I wanted to share with you all. This is a delivery from 3 days ago in a very remote village right near the front lines. And you'll see this normal delivery gets very scary very quickly.
Get your helmet.
Now it's time to put the helmets on. They all get their helmets. And these are their front vehicles.
Are we going somewhere?
They put their helmets on and they get right back to work, which I just love. They're just so great. So these front vehicles are the ones they drive to the front that can drive fast because they have to be able to get out in an emergency. And so the transport vehicles can only make it about 50 kilometers away, and then they have to switch cars and drive back and forth with all the supplies. So Ukrainian International are on the ground providing all this stuff, thanks to your support, so thank you again, and efforts are ongoing. And that's the end of my, and that's a picture of sunflowers that looks like the Ukrainian flag, which is not a coincidence. That's where the flag comes from. Thank you all.
I've been referring to young people. My companion here on the stage is one of those young people who so impressed me when he talks about the coordination, and I'm talking about Reddit and the internet and people communicating. He took his expertise and went to Ukraine and helped to organize these groups. So when he talks about some people, sometimes they have the drivers, and we have the warehouse, and we have the supplies, he's one of the major players who's coordinating these efforts. I mentioned the young man who went to the warehouse. We spoke to the guy who ran the warehouse. He was getting his PhD in sociology in Germany when the war broke out. He was Ukrainian. He comes back to Ukraine. He wants to get committed. He finds someone who's going to donate pretty much a warehouse. He says, I have a warehouse. I can take supplies. Supplies start coming in from wherever. And in the course of the time that he's been there in the last few months, he reported that he's unloaded, loaded, repackaged, loaded. Over 600 trucks have come and gone in the warehouse that he operates, where this young man I mentioned before sleeps in his tent on the warehouse floor. It's just extraordinary to see the effort, but this young man here is a major player in putting that all together. And as he mentioned, the larger NGOs, they don't go to the front lines. They don't send their troops, their staff. It's the volunteers who
I have a
do
map
it.
for that. That's where Doctors Beyond Borders goes, and it's not anywhere close to where we're operating.
So these young people, at the beginning, the story that they shared with me was they got over there, they organized, they put together these kits of basic supplies, shampoo, medicine, and they drove 18 hours, like driving to Chicago or further. They would drive to the cities close to the front lines, and they would start handing out these packets. Here, take this to a soldier. Here, take this to someone on the street. Here, this is for you. And eventually, the authorities came and said, who are you people? I mean, we're blessed to have you, but who are you? And they explained, we're just volunteers who want to help, and that we're bringing supplies that we believe are very much needed. And so in the course of this, the police got to know them, and they made, the volunteers, they made a confession. They managed to put blue lights in their cars, because speed is a factor to get there. They put blue lights in their cars, which is illegal, but you can't have sirens. Well, they found someone to put sirens in their cars. So they were driving illegally, afraid that they may be pulled over. So they made a confession to the police in the front lines. You know, we have sirens. Can you make us legal? And the police said, no, we can't, because your license plate doesn't coordinate with having a siren. But let me call somebody. And it started to go up the chain of command, till eventually they got in touch with the head of the police force, the guy who stands next to Zelensky at the press conferences, and they told them the story. Can we get them a siren so they can expedite their trip to the front? Well, I can't do that, but let me give them my cell phone number. So if they ever get pulled over, just have the police officer call me. That's these young people, 25, 26 years old, are having that kind of communication, and they're there. The police got so comforted with knowing them that they would go door to door and to people and find out what someone specifically needed, whether it could be Advil or it could be insulin or so forth. They put together a list, give it to the young people. They'd go back, they would package it up, know what they had, and then deliver it to the police in these frontline communities, who then would distribute it to the people who needed it. I mean, the operation that has been created with people like Brian and the other volunteers, these young people, it's just amazing to me, and I keep reiterating that story. I sat down, we were in Lviv, and Lviv is very, it's a lovely city, and you had no sense that the people were at war. It is relatively quiet, although when you check into the hotel, obviously the lawyers are there, because there's a long disclaimer that says if you get blown up, it's not our fault. And there's a bomb shelter across the street. They say if you hear the sirens and they go off, you can go to the bomb shelter. Brian admitted that the first night siren went off, he went to the bomb shelter. We sat there alone for an hour and a half and said, I'm not doing this again. While we were there the night, the sirens went off twice, and we all just slept through it for the most part. And that's life in Lviv. But at a cafe where I was talking to two of the volunteers, a fellow named Ryan and a young lady named, he was from England, and a young lady from Scotland, they told their story. He was a roofer, and she was a cashier. And they heard about the story, they picked themselves up, they came, they intended only to stay 2 weeks. They went back to their homes, and in the course of a short while, they realized their hearts were really in Ukraine, and that life back as normal in England and Scotland was not for them any longer. The young lady sold her house, sold her car, and picked up, and now there's a group of 7, Alex 21, they call themselves, They live in a house that they've gotten relatively cheap. And this is what they do day in and day out, is gather supplies, drive them to the front, and confront the challenges and threats that the Russians are imposing on these poor Ukrainian people stuck in this morass of horror.
You forgot the part where they broke up with their significant others and then came back to Ukraine and got together with each other. Yeah. So we don't really know what happened in the two, yeah. But no, they're great, and they're just great. So yeah, you had some questions, and I also wanted to make sure we had left time for the audience to ask some questions as well.
Well, the question that I've been wanting to, we didn't have much time to talk, notwithstanding all the time we spent together. We were pretty busy. Loading, unloading, packaging, and so forth. Brian's parents, Jeff and Nancy and I, we had a chance to chat in the evening. Brian was off working, and I got to know them, and kudos to them for having raised Brian and his brother Marshall, who is behind the scenes doing a lot of the not-for-profit work and collecting the donations. So it's really a family undertaking that is quite amazing in and of itself. But the question I didn't get to ask you is, tell me when the idea came. You know what, this is what I'm going to do. And he's got a serious job. Tell us about that.
Well, I had a vacation to Hawaii planned for that week, the first week of April, and I think it was the second or third week of the war that I was watching the whole thing unfold, and I have quite a few Ukrainian friends, talking to them a lot about what's going on, and it just seemed like a weird time to go on vacation, so I decided not to cancel my vacation, and then I thought, well, I have the time blocked off from work anyway, so I should go somewhere. So I looked up flights to Warsaw, and that's pretty much the end of that. Now, I had quite a few friends that I had made in Poland and other places, so I was able to connect with them and find people that could help connect with volunteers on the ground. But I didn't have any pre-existing connections with anyone in Ukraine or working on Ukraine.
So how does it start? You land in Warsaw, and you look around, you don't know anybody. What do you do next?
Well, I met up with a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who was a filmmaker in Warsaw, and he wanted to go to the border, so I gave him a ride, and then we got to talking on the way, so he was my first official friend on the ground there. And then when we got there, I was connected with someone at the train station here in Przemysl. So when I got there, the train station was packed, hundreds of thousands of people squeezing through this train station, one ticket window. So if you thought it's bad at Grand Central or something, you've never seen anything like it. I wasn't allowed to take any pictures. I snuck this one picture of inside the train hall. They had set up a room for people to sleep, but it wasn't nearly enough beds, and I was being very careful not to take too many pictures. But Przemysl is a beautiful medieval town, and it was ground zero of the refugee crisis for a long time. It still is the main port, land port where Ukrainians are escaping from. Although now more Ukrainians are going back to Ukraine than leaving Ukraine because they have jobs, they have families, But anyway, so I landed in Przemysl and got to work at the train station, and then over time you start to learn what the major needs are. So you start by helping the refugees with, power banks, and charging cell phones is a really big problem. I just spent 20 hours traveling, listening to their stories, helping them find train tickets, helping them, find plane tickets to get out, and that was a big part of what I did. I met some great people there. And then I started learning about where the big needs were, and most of the big needs and the urgent needs that were not being addressed, because there's lots of NGOs in Poland, were on the Ukraine side. And so that's where I started getting drawn into Ukraine and started working with folks on that side of the border.
As I said, Brian has a real job as well back here in the States. Tell us how you managed to keep your job while you're over in Ukraine.
Well, I hope they're not watching. No, I'm just kidding. I did tell my manager that I was over there, and time zone changes are a wonderful thing. I was able to work on Ukraine and Poland and coordinating from 6, 7 a.m. to 3, 4 p.m. and then switch to East Coast time, work a day till midnight, go to bed. I would try to sleep in. I wouldn't do that every day, but that would be the schedule. I try to sleep in every once in a while.
So that's why we didn't get to chat very much. I mean, he'd be working while I'm having breakfast. Then we'd connect, load, unload, package, so forth, drive. And then around 3 o'clock, when we're starting to wind down, he would go to work back here in the States. And as he said, he'd work to midnight. Just an incredible schedule. And you've been doing that for how long?
Well, when I'm there, a couple, I guess 2.5, 3 months that I spent there doing that.
Just extraordinary. And again, I'm so impressed. What's your major takeaway? If you had one takeaway from this experience of your odyssey of helping the Ukrainian people, what would that be?
Well, my literal takeaway is I got a lot of pieces of rockets and other things because I, really want to remember and have that physical reminder. I actually brought one with me. My major takeaway here, I think, is that like I said, thousands of people that I've interacted with directly or indirectly, coordinating aid and helping the Ukrainian people, no one is volunteering for Russia. There's no one living in Kazakhstan who says, I'm going to bring my truck to, help the Russians get food, no one's doing that. There's a major imbalance in this war in favor of Ukraine when it comes to things like the population supporting each other and the world supporting the Ukrainian population, communication, the fact that, you really can, without exaggeration, get a package sent from one end of the country to the other through strangers you've never met securely, through WhatsApp, without ever meeting these people, and trust that it'll get to its destination. There's a camaraderie there. There's a resilience. The Ukrainian people are not giving up, ever. They will not stop. And the emotional toll on the country will have many years to heal, but right now it's all being converted into pure energy. It is a fully operational country with one purpose, and that is to repel the Russian invaders, and everything's being put on hold for that. And that was probably the thing that impressed me the most when I was there, that level of singular commitment to the cause.
Brian mentioned the traffic congestion. We rented a truck, that is Jeff, Nancy, and I, we rented a truck and had it full of stuff, and Brian had his own truck, a refrigerated one, in which he could transport insulin. And so we had to get across the border from Poland into Ukraine, and there's this long line that he described, that you saw a picture of, but somehow we just drove straight to the front of the line. I was impressed with that. I'd been a taxi driver in New York City when I was in law school, and he reminded me to call on those skills in following him, and it's a good thing I had that training, I can tell you. And when you get to the border crossing, the guards are pretty fussy, and they point to you and so forth, and everyone's trying to inch into things, so you have to be pretty aggressive in holding line. But somehow we managed to get through in relatively short periods of time, 2 hours, 3 hours, not days or weeks. How'd you pull that off, Brian?
It helps to be persistent and not let them send you back. At the beginning of the war, actually, they didn't really ask a lot of questions. If you could slap a red cross on your car and get to the front of the line and just say humanitarian aid, they let you through. Now you need a little bit more paperwork. There are some rules around that. But for the most part, it really helps to just cross the border about 30 or 40 times at the same place. You get to know people. They know you. Hey, it's me again. And I have some good Ukrainian and Polish border guard friends. But no, I think it's, like I said, you can sort of make the corruption work in your favor. And a lot of things on that border are very, not necessarily corrupt. I'm not saying I hadn't paid anything to get across the border or anything, but just flexible, right? The rules are flexible and they change frequently. And I like to joke with my friends that do this a lot as well, that I've never crossed the border the same way twice. They always ask for a different document or don't ask for it or ask you different questions. And so you sort of have to be nimble and adapt to the situations. But there's no special trick to it, just knowing the sort of things they care about and the sort of ways you can just be persistent and get across.
Well, I thought buying those magnets with the Red Cross on it
The
was
magnets
clever.
help.
Yeah.
It also, the medicine you provided helps. So that particular time, so the rule is you're not allowed to cross with priority unless you're carrying critical medical aid. I have gotten a lot of things across the border and called it critical medical aid. Band-aids, for example, tissues. I have also taken critical medical aid, but sometimes your truck is full of food and you need to somehow also convince them that you have medical aid. So you sort of work around that system a little bit.
Just an impression I had, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. You may have some questions you'd like to ask. Brian described how tenacious and determined the Ukrainian people are. That was obvious to even a casual observer like myself. But what also I extracted in the way of information that's frightening is the Russians are playing the long game. As Brian has explained to me, the money and the industry is in the East. And that's what the Russians want to dominate and control is the factories and where the money is, and of course, access to the sea in the south. What that does is it isolates Ukraine. And without international aid and these long lines of trucks, that's not sustainable. My impression is the Russians really don't have much interest any longer in occupying Ukraine. They want to destroy it. They're literally taking hundreds of thousands of young people in the East and sending them to Russia to be raised as Russian. In the East, and I've heard this from my professor friends at the university where I taught, who we managed to stay in touch, you have to speak Russian. You have to use the ruble. The schools are only Russian. The media is all Russian. They're going to have a referendum and have a vote which will obviously be that the people in the villages and towns and areas that they occupy want to become Russian. And that's their game, and they'll bring that to the public. And then they'll literally just chip away at the rest of Ukraine, undermining its economy and its capacity to survive at all.
Which is actually Putin's fighting a 16th century war. That's not how economies work. This is how economies work, people. And all the people that create that wealth are fleeing, or have left. And a lot of them have left. This is a family that I gave a ride to Warsaw from the border. Incredible family from Odessa. And they just, at the first days of the war, just picked and left. But a lot of people are like this. So the brain drain is really scary for Ukraine, because a lot of those people won't go back. But Putin can't force people to be brilliant and invent things and do all these things that people do, and where the wealth actually comes from. And he can see that in his own country. I mean, people have been leaving Russia in droves. Anyone educated, can contribute to the economy has been trying to leave. So it's going to backfire on him.
So are there questions from the audience? And if there are, you have to go to the microphone so that we can record you. We have a few minutes for questions and answers if you'd like. Or have we answered them all? George.
Ken and Brian, thank you very much for what you're doing. Really, really appreciate it. Oh, there we go. I have two questions. One is, you came to Warsaw. First question, when you came to Warsaw, you don't speak Ukrainian, you don't speak Russian.
Or Polish.
Or Polish. So how did you begin to communicate? And then do many Ukrainians now speak English? I know most of yours speaks English now, so maybe that wasn't so much of a problem. And second question is, was there any worry about Russian sympathizers in the part of Ukraine where you were at? Because you keep hearing stories about that as well.
Yes, a great question. So the first question is language. So I don't speak any other languages other than English very well, and the communication is a barrier. There are a lot of Ukrainians who speak English, and all the Ukrainians I work with speak English. That's just the way it has to be. I have to work through translators. A lot of people I work with speak Russian and other things as well. But English is pretty common in Poland, and in the western of Ukraine it's pretty common, so I can get by on that. As for Russian sympathizers, the answer is yes. I've heard some. In Kharkiv, when I was there, I was told that in the weeks leading up to the war, there were Russians or locals living in Kharkiv who were helping the Russians out by putting infrared markers on the buildings, because once the electricity cuts out, the lights go out, the planes still need to be able to find the buildings they want to bomb. So there were sympathizers working in Russia, working in Ukraine, who were Ukrainian citizens for years now, and they're all over the place. So in the volunteer groups that we work with, we have a couple of rules, but the number one rule is no full names, no first names if you don't want to give one, no public contact information, and we're very careful about OPSEC, especially with our frontline people. We're all on Signal and encrypted apps, and every single Facebook group, WhatsApp group you work with, you have to assume that there's at least one, probably many, Russian intelligence assets in that group. Oh, and when you're calling people on your phone, it scrambles the signal, because the Russians are scrambling the signal all the time, so you have to use WhatsApp for calling too, in the East.
Hi,
Yes.
Ken.
Yes.
I'm just curious. I was listening to you. Congratulations, by the way, for your extraordinary work. And I can see that you must be one of the few people that are actually figuring out the systems that need to be in place for this thing to work. It's amazing that you've done this almost alone. But I'm very curious. The whole time I was listening and thinking, where is the Ukrainian government in this? Where are the federal connections, representatives? We see Zelensky's talking on international headlines and press. He's at the UN, whatever. Is he in some form finding you guys?
It's a great question. So you answered that a bit, talking about the way the Alex 21 team found the head of the National Police. There are some connections there. The problem is the government doesn't have pretty much any money. They're spending it on the war effort. And so you're not going to get governmental help for humanitarian aid. In fact, the Kharkiv subway station, which was where most of that food was going, actually the food in this picture, most of that food is going to a subway station in Kharkiv for people to eat. That program was shut down by the Kharkiv city government because they ran out of money. They've got a destroyed town. Just to give you some context, that's filling up. Here. This is Kharkiv, and I was there a couple weeks ago. This is what a good third of the town looks like right now. And that apartment building on the right is it's a district, two districts next to each other. Collectively, 500,000 people live in it. There's not a single functioning apartment building. They either look like that, they've been bombed directly, or they've been hit with shockwaves. And all those people were displaced and needed to find places to live. At the beginning of the war, the government was helping them, ran out of money. And so NGOs like ours stepped in to fill the gap. As for government help with the work that we're doing, it's been slow coming. We have lots of conversations pending with various ministers, but there have been some pretty terrible stories that about the lack of cooperation we've gotten from a lot of government agencies as well. Like I said, it is the government has not been the best partner, even before the war.
One of the refugee centers that we were able to visit, you'd see a supermarket cleared out, maybe the size of this room, a little bit bigger, and it would be cot after cot after cot after cot. And so these poor people would get off of buses, their kids, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're given clean linen, and they find a cot or they're assigned. And that becomes their home. The shower is a makeshift cardboard tarps outdoors in a parking lot. Medical is, again, it's plywood separation. Maybe you can go and get an aspirin or an Advil, I don't know. If you are lucky enough to be in transit, they have, again, sectioned off parts of this large vacant space with that, if you're going to Canada or you're going to Spain or so forth, so you know what place to visit. But many of the people, they don't want to leave or they can't leave. They don't want to go to Spain and become part of the welfare system. So they stay there, and this is now their home. A cot, the kids that need to be educated. These are people who had jobs, had cars, middle-class people who, worried about the orthodontist and changing the oil in their car, and now they're reduced to living on cots in a strange city with no place to go. There's a soup kitchen, so their basic needs are being taken care of. But you come home and you look around and you think, gee, I don't have anything to worry about. I am so, so fortunate that this is not my life. And of course, it's not the life that they wanted. It's been forced on them.
One NGO I would definitely call out here that I didn't mention is World Central Kitchen. They've really done a great job. And not only on the Poland side, which is what you're talking about, where all the NGOs are, but on the Ukraine side, they're actually sending trucks into Ukraine. They're actually supplying kitchens in Ukraine. They're supplying food. So they've actually done a great job. And that's one of the very, very few NGOs that I've seen on the ground.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Brian, I agree with the lady before me who said what an amazing job you're doing. And I'm just thankful you're safe and that all of the people you're working with are safe. That's a big concern. I get worried about that. But my question was, is all this humanitarian aid coming out of Poland? And if that's the central location, why is the government making it so bureaucratic to help Ukraine? Is there any plan to go through Moldova or maybe circumvent? Like, what can you do?
Great question. So I couldn't tell you any why reasons. I could tell you what the results are. So Poland is EU, Schengen. It's just much richer and easier to get things there and get them out. Romania is a big transit point as well. Moldova is not. The space between Moldova and Ukraine is a Russian breakaway region. That's mostly Russian occupied, so that's a bad place to be. But unfortunately, I couldn't tell you why. I've heard stories about, the Polish people have been incredible. Politically speaking, the government is still very conservative and is still very concerned, and increasingly so now that it's been a couple months, about all of the Ukrainians in Poland that need jobs, that are burdened on the system, all the same stuff. I'm sure you've heard that story before, and that may be leading to some hesitation on the government's part as well. It is difficult to say, but I could tell you that I left this experience with nothing but admiration for the Polish people, the Ukrainian people, the work that they're doing, and a lot of frustration towards the Polish government, the Ukrainian government, and organizations that are ostensibly there to help, but sort of aren't.
Please.
Thank you for sharing that story. I'm going to try to, when I ask this question, I don't mean to be negative at all, but you're what we call kind of an expeditionary entrepreneur, or someone who just doesn't necessarily come from the humanitarian assistance or crisis response community. You've gone over, you've figured out the system, and you're having material impact, and you're realizing the kind of systemic breakdown in the system, the relief infrastructure, as it were. But you come back here and you see the flags and the yard signs, and it's like this massive disconnect, right? Because the solidarity is incredible, it's really powerful. But I would say it's really scary is the amount of mis and disinformation, especially in this particular crisis, but it's the same in any major occurrence. And a solution we've seen to that is when people get on the ground and they have these experiences, they become much more aware of the cultural nuances, the political nuances. And the Ukraine crisis is not new. Russia's stance was very, very black and white for a long time. And there's probably totally unjustified what's going on. It's horrible. It's wild what's happening. It's unconscionable. But what's happening is also very reactionary. All this aid that we're providing, it's very, it's palliative, right? We're helping, we're bringing in med kits, we're training, all these types of things, but still it's reactionary. And to prevent these things from happening in the future, it requires a very informed populace, right? So how do you think more people, when people hear your story, they see this, this guy who's gone over, and it's incredible, it's remarkable, people, don't do that. But we would argue more and more folks have to have these types of on-the-ground experience or this exposure to really, truly be informed to see how these things play out. So for the long term, to prevent them, right? Do you have any insight into that, or?
I'm not a politician, so I couldn't tell you how to prevent things in the future. I could tell you that the geopolitical situation is very complicated. Lots of Russian speakers going to the West in Ukraine is also causing issues, right? You've got culturally distinct populations, in many cases different cultures, different language, different food, and that's causing some issues too. So, and of course the Russians are very quick to jump on any strife inside of Ukraine to demonstrate why Russians need to be, quote, liberated, right, from Ukrainians. That video that I showed you of Venezia when that rocket hit that Liz took, that was on Russian state TV. And it was on Russian state TV to prove that the Americans, because they're speaking English, had planned this attack and were on the ground to film it, to make it look like the Russians were attacking civilians. And I'm not even kidding, it was on Russian state TV. And that's pretty terrifying, that you can take such a ridiculous mistruth, right, and amplify it. And of course, anytime there's a story about, you know, a war crime or something that a Ukrainian soldier does, or a Russian person suffers in some way, which of course it's war, it's going to happen, that immediately becomes the narrative, right, on the Russian TV. So Russian media is very prevalent there. I don't know if I can answer your question about people helping. I mean, I certainly would rather people have the flags and have the solidarity than not, because I think the awareness is very important. And I could tell you, when the money's flowing in and you can help people, it's great. And when people start caring about other issues, that stuff goes away. And so, you know, I'd say keep reading, keep learning about what's happening. Don't forget that the war is actively happening right now. This was 2 weeks ago. They dragged that tank into the middle of Kyiv as a trophy. And this one, someone spray painted a butterfly on it, but this was a long column of tanks. I was there 2 weeks ago. It still smelled of human decomp, still. And I mean, this is happening now. And so as long as people don't forget that it's happening now and the needs are ongoing, now we have to continue to support the population through the rebuild. And that's why we're very careful to do things like shop at local supermarkets, right? We want to support any existing supply lines that exist. And you don't want to circumvent those by taking aid in. And we learned taking aid from Poland is a lot more expensive, a lot more costly as a nonprofit than it is to just buy it, if you can, inside Ukraine. The problem is that some things you can't get in Ukraine, some things you can't, you know, and you know, there's a lot of complications there. So I'm also going to put Expeditionary Entrepreneur on my business card, so thank you for that.
This is truly remarkable. So let me start with that. My question for you, we're now 6 months into the Russian invasion. How sustainable is what you're doing, in your view? How long can this go on? You know, it's when you're faced with a horror, you say, okay, I'll get in there and do something now. 6 months from now, what is the status going to be? Before you answer that question, let me make one other very brief comment. And that is, in terms of medical supplies, I really think it's important to get iodine pills in there because of what's happening in Zaporizhzhia.
Yes, absolutely, about the iodine. And if you have a connection on that, let's talk, because we need. Sorry. Your question, 6 months, right? Where we mean in 6 months? I don't know. I just don't know. I know that everyone thought this war was going to be over in 3 days, and then everyone thought the war was going to be over in 3 months, and now, who knows? The Ukrainians aren't backing down. What we're doing we're trying to find more and more sustainable ways of doing what we're doing. We've stopped doing a lot of the stuff we were doing at the beginning of the war, like the refugee transport and stuff like that. Those needs have gone away. Now the needs are mostly gone away. Now the needs are mostly on the food aid side. So the needs have shifted constantly. And right now, we're only focusing on frontline deliveries. So that's sustainable as we just need to keep paying for fuel. We need to keep having these volunteers that are able to take this stuff out there. I don't know where we're going to be in 6 months. I don't. I hope the war is over, and once the war ends, Ukraine can rebuild itself. And Ukraine's already rebuilding itself in the places that have been deoccupied. But it's still those places that are right near where the bombs are going off that we're most scared about. You know, people, cities, Zaporizhzhia, there's Kherson, there's places where hundreds of thousands of people live where the war is right there on their doorstep. The mail won't send mail anymore. You know, FedEx doesn't run there, whatever the equivalent is. And how do you actually get the aid there that people need and the food there that people need if they can't move, they're elderly? It's a very difficult situation. I don't have a good answer.
Yes, please.
Hi. Clearly,
sure.
you've been moving stuff from the borders to the front lines, and I've been trying to get equipment from here to there, and running into some hurdles, but also making some successes there with equipment like firefighting equipment, et cetera. One of the hurdles that I'm running into, because I speak Ukrainian and I talk to Ukrainian people here and around, and they're very suspect of that stuff moving from here to there. And I was wondering if you could enlighten me as to how I can or where I can learn that these places are vetted and they're actually moving stuff forward and through the supply lines. So that would help expedite a lot of the stuff that I can get my hands on. And I already have a warehouse in New Jersey I can bring it to. From there, I've been told, because I'm not actually there, it's moving to Ivano-Frankivsk, but then it needs to get distributed from there. So what can you enlighten me about how to vet that and make that work really well?
Sounds like we need to talk after, for sure.
Okay.
Nice shirt. So you're right. I mean, there's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of trust issues, and unfortunately the answer, probably like it is everywhere, but especially there, it's you work with people you trust, and sometimes it takes a while to develop that trust. And you know, I've heard stories of people, you know, delivering aid and then seeing the same aid that was marked with their logo or whatever showing up at a store later on, right? I mean, there are some stories like that, and so you have to really only work with the partners that you trust. And with big equipment transfer like that, I wouldn't send it there without knowing personally the people that were going to be picking it up. But if you need to find those people, let me know.
Let's make that the last question. I personally just want to thank everybody here for coming, for your interest in this issue. It's encouraging. I know Brian is grateful as well, and also your financial support. We've really done very well from the Westport community. All of you deserve a large or a loud clap of applause for what you've done, but particularly because you're here. I know Brian is thrilled that you're here and that you have an interest in what he has to say. And I would add and conclude with, can we give Brian a hearty applause?
And thank you, Ken.